Hello, my name is Donald Best. Welcome to another Am I Crazy video. And in this instant, on this video today, the answer is definitely no. Because we're going to be talking about grief. And grief is not a mental illness. It's an important point I want to get out there really quickly first. Grief is a normal reaction we have to loss. Could be of a person, could be our dreams going up in smoke, could be a favorite pet, could be anything that we lose. We experience a grief reaction to it. And so this violates, or kind of, as the Russians would say, proves the rule that mental illness is about misery. We'll get more into that. Generally, your grief reaction will include a lot of misery. Now, it used to be we thought that you have to go pretty far back in time. We find traditions about wearing black and a certain period of mourning and these kinds of things. And these traditions were good in that it gave people space and recognized that they needed to do some things to recover well from grief. And certainly being sad and miserable is normal in this certain circumstance. Then along came ideas on the stages of grief. Research started to be done, and we've started to find patterns in how people dealt with grief, and many of you might be aware of the stages of grief. However, this research was done under very controlled, very similar circumstances, and what we're finding in further follow-up research to that is people don't necessarily go through all the stages of grief that were first identified, and not necessarily in the same order, depending on what they lose and how long it takes and all of this thing. So what the research is telling us since then is that it's not important how you react to grief, and it's not important what order you experience grief in. It is important to how comfortable you are being at any particular stage in grief. So dealing with grief in a healthy manner is pretty simple. It simply means that you accept whatever feeling it is that you're feeling. Anger, denial, doesn't matter. Just accept it and be where you're at, and don't set up secondary waves of trauma by fighting what you're feeling. If you think you should be sad and you're not, then maybe you're angry and oh, you think you're a bad person for being angry. No, you're not. That's fine. That's a perfectly normal response to grief, and it will likely pass. Just accept it. Don't hang on to it. Don't hang on to the sadness. Accept it when it comes. Release it when it goes. That's the key to recovering healthy in grief. There's a couple of more things I would like to add to that. Going back to, well, can you and should you get over it? Well, it's pretty clear you can get over it. The problem with getting over it is, do you want to and should you? And the answer on that is probably not. People get over love all the time. They get divorces, they have falling outs, disagreements. They go from a situation of being very close and tight with somebody to not caring at all whether or not they'll ever die. So it's possible to get over something you love, to lose it and get over it. But in a situation where the separation is involuntary, the person died, for instance, rather than divorced you and left, it's often not desirable. The person doesn't want to get over that love relationship. They want to hang on to that, and that's okay. That's fine. Now, no one who loves you wants you to be miserable forever. So they may also feel supportive of you cherishing their memory and not getting over that love relationship, but they're not going to want you to have it ruin the rest of your life. And they're probably going to want you to focus on remembering the good times rather than the pain and loss you feel in the present while you're cherishing that memory. So that can be the difficult part of getting over and I should say dealing with grief, is finding some kind of balance where you don't want to lose that love relationship, but you want to be mentally healthy, because that's the real key. Misery is normal in grief, but dysfunction beyond a few weeks afterwards is not normal. If dysfunction starts to be a problem much past a few weeks from the loss, or whenever that loss is realized to some degree, then we can diagnose mental illness. And that's when you should most likely think about ways to better manage your reaction to grief. You should also reach out to family and friends, because grief is often a situation that exposes weaknesses in our support structure, particularly if it's an important part of our support structure that died. So if someone dies and leaves us without anybody to support us, this happens in cases of widows and widowers, where the individual has a great support network in terms of a partner, and all these children often who are dependent on them for emotional support, and suddenly they're not getting any independent emotional support. So that's when, if suddenly your support network is deficient, then I highly recommend a support group, a grieving support group, grieving psychotherapy. I have a great person to refer you to if you live in the right area. She's awesome. There are some really good grief counselors out there and help out there, should that be part of the problem. So that's when mental illness really becomes an issue, when it causes significant dysfunction over a long period of time, or right off the bat the support network is harmed by this loss to the point where it's not functioning, and you need it just to function, just in normal life, much less when you're dealing with grief. So definitely put that out there. I'd like to end with a story that illustrates what can go wrong. Okay, so we have two sisters. One lives very far from their mother, one lives very close. The one who lives far from her mother calls her mother every day and has a nice, pleasant conversation with her. But her mother's dying of cancer, and the sister who's living close goes over every day and her mother can't put on a smiling face for this sister. She sees her weeping and her pain and misery as her life is ending. And she goes into grieving and is sad and miserable with her mother long before the other sister. And she also takes on a huge part of the burden of caring for her mother. She's over there every day doing the dishes, cleaning the house, helping hold her mother's head out of the toilet so she doesn't drown. All these horrible things that mean that she is grieving already the loss of her mother and grieving while the other sister isn't. The other sister's allowed to the denial that her mother's okay and that, you know, maybe her life, she's aware that she's dying, but she's really not aware how miserable her mother is. So her mother finally passes, and the two sisters have very different reactions to this. The other sister has been grieving for some time now, and the close sister has been grieving for some time now, and is relieved, is happy, is excited that she doesn't have to go over there and see and deal with her mother's problems anymore. She goes to the funeral and puts a smile on her face. She misses her mother. She sheds a few tears, but for the most part, she's just beaming that the suffering of her mother and herself is finally over. The other sister arrives, and that's when it hits her. It doesn't hit her until she sees that somewhat fake, made-up looking thing in the coffin, that her mother is really gone, and those daily phone calls will never happen again. And she's devastated. And she goes to cry on her other sister's shoulder and is horrified to see that her sister's happy. She verbally attacks her sister, saying, "How dare you be happy that our mother's dead?" The other sister internalizes this and goes, "Wow, I am happy that she's dead. Maybe there's something wrong with me." And she then starts feeling guilty about that. This causes a falling out between the sisters, so that someone who was supportive of her now the near sister has lost two people in her support network, and it's not enough now. And suddenly the sister starts to go into depression, feeling guilty that she didn't ever properly mourn for her mother, thinking something's wrong with her in terms of reaction, trying to force herself to feel bad and sad about her mother's death, and never really experiencing the joy that the suffering is over, and not letting that emotion come and go naturally. So this story, I think, illustrates some of the fighting that can go on. It's not just the money and the will and all of that that goes on that causes family or brings out family problems in funerals and such. It's stories like this where two people are unwilling to see and validate the other person's experience of grief that is different from their own because they're different people. And that's the last message I'd like to leave about grief, is that understand whatever somebody else's reaction to grief is a valid response to grief. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean they didn't love that person. It just means that they're at a different point in the grief process than you are, and that's okay. I hope this is helpful.